information, like so the basic information that you'll be seeing. Okay, so that is the main intention of this application. So this is just like a minor basic application, like minor, very very minor .NET API, like web API. Okay, so don't worry about this web API. So our intention is to mainly look at like so what this Docker file is and how these multi-stage builds actually work. Okay. Yeah. So initially, like what we did is like, so there are like multiple stages, like just like any other programming languages, like Java or .NET or any programming languages. So even in Java, like you have something called as build. So you can actually build a particular application, like web application or any of these applications, and the end result will be like DLLs. Okay, so you'll get like a series of DLLs. So the for build in order to build a particular web application, .NET web application, so you need to have some basic software, like so you need to have like MS Build. So that is a software like which is actually needed for building this particular any code. Okay. So in case of like my host machine, like on my laptop, so I have this bulky Visual Studio installed, and with this Visual Studio, like I'll get almost everything. Like I'll be getting like MS Build and almost like it is almost like 5 GB of it occupies like 5 GB space, like Visual Studio itself, like okay, and then the .NET framework. So whereas like on the Docker container, so we don't want to have this big like this much of 5 GB of Visual Studio, and then so we don't want to build it over there, right? So usually what we do is like, so there is something called as like MS Build or something like that. Okay. So what it does is, so it is a basic component like which is actually used to build the .NET applications. Okay. For your understanding, like sake of understanding, there is a lot involved, but for you to understand, like so, just keep in mind that like so you need to have something called as like MS Build in order to build this application. So once you build this application, so it is actually it will generate you these DLLs. Okay. So once these DLLs are actually generated, so you need to have a runtime software. Okay, ASP.NET runtime software, and this software is actually responsible for serving your application. So serving your API, like okay. So for this software, like in order to so just give me a second. Just give me 5 seconds. Like okay, I'll be back. Mean, I'm back. Yeah. So that is the main purpose of like this SDK 5.0. So if we see any of these softwares, okay, so there are like multiple content images that are actually provided by .NET. So you can actually see. So some images like images are actually used for build the .NET applications. and some images are just used to run these .NET applications. Okay. So mostly like SDK 6.0, like this image, it includes like both the deployment as well as like the development. It has this building capability of the .NET code, and also it has the capability to run this .NET applications. Okay. So whereas like this ASP.NET 6.0, like it doesn't have the capability to build any of these .NET applications. Okay. So it's just used for running these applications. It has only the runtime, like .NET runtime. Okay. So now my requirement is something like this. So I have a web application on my host machine, and I want to build this application, and at the same time, like I want to run this application. Okay. So for me, like building, I'm not least bothered about this building this particular image. So final goal is like, so I want to generate an image which consists of all this published DLLs, and then I should be able to run that particular image in the production environment. Okay. So hope you are clear about the requirement. Any questions over here?
Anna, I didn't understand. Can you repeat it?
Okay. So basically, this is a small .NET application. Okay. So this is a small application which consists of like one endpoint. Okay. It has a small get endpoint, and it will just display a few of these messages like today's temperature, some random temperature as a number, and then today's date, and then some random text from these list. Okay. So it is a very basic .NET application. Okay. So if you see, like Microsoft actually provides like two types of images. One is like SDK 6.0 image. The other one is like ASP.NET 6.0. And this is based on the versions. Like, so right now on my machine, I'm using 5.0. So that is the reason why like I'm going with 5.0. So, and same is the case with SDK 6.0. So the difference between this image and this image is, so SDK 6.0, it includes both the SDKs. It includes all these SDKs. SDK is nothing but like standard development kit. Okay.
Okay.
Software development kit. So it has like everything. Like, so you can actually write some code and then you can build this particular code and then you can run this code. Okay. It is just like your environment. So usually like what happens is, so what we do in the real-time environments is like in the production environments is, so we build the .NET source code using like some Jenkins software or on a specific machine, okay, which is not a production machine. So once we
Okay.
build this particular code, the .NET code, we'll be getting some DLLs as an end result, okay. So what we do is like, so we copy all these DLLs into another machine. Like, so these machines are called the second machines onto which we are copying these DLLs. They are actually production servers. Okay.
Okay.
So you can ask me like, why can't I ship the code directly onto the production machines, and then why can't I actually build the code over there? So that is not the process. Like, so usually like, so the production machines should have only the ASP.NET runtime. They should not include any build environment. Okay. So you should not. So if you want to have the build, so you need to install all the .NET related, .NET framework related SDKs and everything, like which will be heavy. Okay. So that is the reason why, like, so just keep in mind, like SDK 6.0, this is used for building this application, and you can also run those applications using SDK 6.0. Whereas like ASP.NET 6.0, this is a lightweight one when compared to SDK 6.0. Okay. So for example, if SDK, we'll see like, so what's the space for SDK 6.0? So you can actually see, this is my ASP.NET 5.0, and this is of size like 205 MB. Okay. So you can see this, right?
Yes, Pavan.
Whereas like my other like MCR. So I believe like some of these are like MCR images. Okay. Or I'll do one thing, like I'll just download this image. Docker pull. So you can see like, so this is this MCR SDK version, and the one next to that is like ASP.NET. So you can actually see which one is heavy. Like, so SDK, it is almost like 632 MB, and this ASP.NET application is just like 205 MB. So I'll just let you know a use case, like, so why the image size matters, like, so why always the image size should be less. Okay, so I'll just give you an example. So for example, like, how many of you watch IPL?
I
Almost
do.
everyone.
Okay,
Almost
so there is an application where you can actually create like a fantasy cricket team, and then so you can actually select players. So how many of you actually play that? Like, so the fantasy cricket app.
Dream 11.
Yeah, Dream 11. Like, so how many of you actually play that contest?
I watched, but try doing that. I watched, but I didn't.
Okay. So I'll just give you an example. What this particular app does is, so basically, like, there are like two teams playing this cricket match, right? So you'll have almost like 22 players, and then apart from this 22, you'll have five who are on bench. Let's assume, like, okay. So almost like you can actually select, like, there are 32 players who are playing for these two teams, right? So out of these 32, only 11, like 22 people will be playing the match, right? Okay. So the main concept this behind this fantasy cricket league is something like this. Okay. So what happens is, like, so you need to select a team from these 32 people, like you need to pick only 11 people. Okay. So this is your team. So if a particular person like whom you picked, so if he is performing well in the match, so you'll get like additional points. Okay. So based on the points, like your rank will be decided. So, and if you get like a good rank, so if you're in top 10 or something like that, like, so they'll announce some prize money, like, so it's like 1 lakh or 1,50,000 or something like that. Okay. So in order to play this particular context, like contest, like you need to pay a minimal amount of like 12 rupees, 11 rupees, 20 rupees, something like that. Okay. So one thing like what you need to observe here is, so before actually, so like you all watch the cricket, right? IPL matches, right? So actually, like, let's assume that the match starts at like 4 o'clock. Okay. So at around like 3:45, they'll announce like the playing 11 team. Is that the case? That is the case, right?
Yeah, I think before starting the match.
So how many of you watch IPL or any cricket match?
Think
Only
I
one?
didn't watch.
No.
Okay.
I watch almost all the matches.
Okay, so
Cricket.
you watch it, right? So what is the case? Like, so how, when they decide the team, like, so when will they announce the team, like the final playing 11 team?
I think it's before
30 minutes.
Yeah.
It
Or
is
Just
30
before
minutes.
the match.
just before the match, right? So let's take an example, like if the match is at like 4 o'clock, so they'll announce the teams at around like 3:30, something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say like you selected your team, like, so in the morning, like at around after waking up, at like before coming to office, like at 10 a.m., like you picked up your fantasy team, like you picked up like out of this 32 people, so you picked up 11 people, like whom you think like they'll perform very well in this match. Okay. So there is a buffer period, like, so the match starts at 4 p.m. and then the team is announced at 3:30 p.m. Okay. So there is a feasibility such that, like, let's say like you selected 11 people, and out of these 11 people, like there are three people like who are not going to play in this match. Okay. So they are kept in the reserve team. Okay. So if these three people they're sitting idle, like only 8 people will be left, right? So you'll not get like good amount of points. So there is an option that is provided in this Dream 11 such that like once the team is announced, you can actually, there is a chance to change your team accordingly. Okay. So then at 3:30 you can actually log in, and then you can see like, okay, are all the people like whom I selected, are they playing in the current are they playing in the current match? Okay. So if anyone is not playing, so there is an option to change your team. So you can remove that person and then you can add someone else based on your choice. Okay. So there are millions of people like who are watching IPL in India, and then there are lakhs of people like who are actually participating in this Dream 11 competition. So when do you think like the peak load will be on this application?
After squad decided.
After the squad is decided. So just assume like so you picked up your team at around 10 a.m. in the morning, but obviously like you'll come and check whether all the team members like you selected they are in the team or not, right? At 3:30.
Yeah.
That's true, right? So there will be a huge spike in the traffic like at around 3:30. Okay, so that is because so everyone wants to use this application and then they want to make sure that all their team members are playing in the current match. Okay, so at 3:30, all of a sudden, like your traffic increases. Okay. So when your traffic is increasing all of a sudden, so how do we actually scale this application? So what's the main purpose of Docker and then this Kubernetes? Okay. So the main advantage of Docker and Kubernetes is something like this. So you can actually scale your application on the fly, Kubernetes. So for example, in the Kubernetes, so you can just specify like I wanted, so based on this count, like I want 1,000 nodes to be I want to deploy this application into 1,000 containers. Okay, all of a sudden. So it will start at 3:30 or at 3:20. What it does, so it will actually deploy or it starts creating all these containers like 3,000 containers all of a sudden, and then they'll be running in the background. Okay, so in order to run 3,000 containers, 1,000 containers all of a sudden at a single point of time, so how much memory, like how many images you need to download like onto that node? So for example, like if it is like 632 MB, so you need to download like 632 into 1,000 containers, like 1,000 times like this particular image on each of these nodes, right? So will you go with like this 632 MB one or this 2051?
205.
205.
Obviously, like we want this image size to be less because like
Yes.
so when you are actually because like this particular image, so it is supposed to be downloaded from the internet onto the node, onto your host machine. Okay, so when you're downloading this image onto your host machine, so obviously like it takes some network bandwidth, and if it is like 632 MB, so it is almost like 3 times. So the download time will be a bit high, right, when compared to this 205 MB. So that is the reason why like we should always make sure that like our image size is very less, like so it is just like around 205. It are not it should be less. We should always try to keep it less, and also the startup time of the image should be fast. Okay, so now let's go back to this our application. Okay, so we have like this .NET SDK 5 and then ASP.NET images. Okay, so .NET SDK, what it does is like so it can be used for building this application and running this application, whereas like ASP.NET it is used only for running this application. Okay, Prithvi, you have any question?
Yeah. Images జనరల్గా లైక్ కంటైనర్స్ ఒకసారి బిల్డ్ చేస్తే సరిపోతుంది కదా, మరలా చేయం కదా. సో ఫస్ట్ టైం ఇట్ విల్ టేక్స్ టైం, బట్ సెకండ్ టైం నుంచి అంత టైం పట్టదు కదా. సో
So in my case, like I have only single host machine. Okay, so this is my laptop, right?
yeah.
So this is my single host machine. Okay, so in this case, like I have only one image, and then next time when I'm starting the container, like how many containers I start, so it is using the same image. But ideally, like in real-time environments, like we'll have multiple nodes. Each node will have Docker engine. Okay, and each node will act as like a Docker host. Ideally it should download. So your question is something like this. So why not like once we download this image like onto the 1,000 on, so we'll download this 1,000 on this image onto this 1,000 nodes at a single time, right? So after the match is done, like do you still use this application, Dream 11 application,
No.
after the last ball? So once
No.
once the winner is decided in this application like Dream 11, so you'll not visit this application until next day, right? So
Yeah.
is it really necessary to keep all these 1,000 servers up and running after the match? It is not required, right? So
Yeah.
we'll simply delete all those nodes. And again, like the next day at around 3:30 p.m., 3:15 p.m. or 3:20 p.m. So again, like we'll start these containers. create these nodes and then start these containers.
Okay.
Okay. So that is all the scaling related. So you understood, right? So now does it make sense? Like,
Yeah. Got it.
okay. Yeah. So coming back to our application. So I have my .NET code. Let's assume that like I have, this is my host machine and I don't have like any Visual Studio or anything like that. So I downloaded the code from the GitHub onto my host machine. So now I want to build this source code, and then I want to run this source code. Okay. So what I can actually do, so I can use this SDK 5.0, and this is actually used for building this application. So .NET build, I'll be building my project. Like, so this is my project, okay, web application 1.cs project. So I'm just building this code, and then I'm putting all the DLLs into this folder, like app build. Okay. And now, so since this SDK 5.0, this has like both build capabilities as well as the capabilities to run an application. Okay. So after building the code, what I'm actually doing, so I'm doing like, I'm setting this working directory to this particular folder. Okay. So now I'm issuing this command .NET web applications.dll. Okay. There is a small issue with, so actually this runs on a server called as Kestrel server, and it starts it on localhost, but the container doesn't actually recognize the local host. So that is the reason why like I should actually pass this exclusively. Okay. So this is the issue like which we had yesterday. Like I don't know, like so I need to pass this. So after reading some documentations from Microsoft, like I came to know about this. Okay. So now I'll actually run this. C#. Docker build and then minus t. Okay, so the image got built. So since I have since this is already built previously, like it is actually getting cached. But on a new node, like if we are actually deploying it on a production environment and we have like 1,000 nodes, so on each node it gets downloaded okay. So I have this image. Now I'll run this application. Okay. Minus 80 minus capital P, and then I'm running this image. Okay, so now yesterday it used to listen on localhost, but today since we pass this option of 0.0.0, so it is actually listening on this thing. Okay. Now let me check the port on which it is exposed. Okay, so this is just like the sample data this API is returning. Okay, so now my intention is to show you that. So this is a bulky image, right? So I'm using this SDK 5.0, and then I'm building this code using this .NET SDK 5.0. And finally, like in the release folder, like I got this particular DLLs. All these DLLs are present in this release folder. And I'm starting this .NET application, .NET server in this release folder. Okay. And what is the size of our image? Let's see the size. You can see this is almost like 660 MB. And this is based out of .NET SDK. And this is 632 MB. So my code and then my changes, so they're occupying almost like 30 MB. Okay, additionally, like my layer on top of this SDK. So this is occupying almost like 660 MB. Like I'm able to run this application, my API, on an image like which is occupying almost like 660 MB. Okay, so is this clear?
Yeah.
But I don't want to do that. Like, so I want to reduce my image size. So this is for building this application. But in order to run this application, so there is another option. So I can actually use this ASP.NET 6.0, right? So I can use this 6.0 image and then I can simply, this has only the runtime. So I can simply copy my code onto this ASP.NET 6.0 image and then I can run my application like on this container, okay, built out of the 6.0 image. So even it will have the same behavior, like it can also, it is also exposing this 5000 port and then it is also running the Castrol server, ASP.NET Core. But let's say like if my image size actually gets reduced. So if this is the option, like if we are not aware of this multi-stage build, so what will you do ideally? Any thoughts? Hmm? Any thoughts? So let's assume that like I gave you a bare node like Ubuntu machine or something like that, and I gave you my repo URL, okay, my .NET Core repo URL. So you don't have like any .NET framework on your Ubuntu machine, okay? So you have only Docker installed on that particular Ubuntu host machine, okay? So now you need to build this code and then you need to run this code. Any thoughts?
Maybe నువ్వు చెప్పిన రన్ టైమ్ ఎస్డికే లైక్ ఫ్రేమ్వర్క్ ఉంది కదా, దాన్ని యూస్ చేసుకొని దాని మీద దీన్ని రన్ చేయొచ్చు కదా. లైక్ ఐ డోంట్ నో హౌ టు డు దట్.
Yeah, so one option, so right now we are doing that only. So we are exposing this port 5000 and I'm running this application on 5000. Okay. So this is one option. Like, so you can simply use this SDK 5.0 and then you can build the application and then you can run this Kestrel server on this server. But the only downside of this is like it is occupying almost like 600 MB space.
బట్ ఆ రన్ టైమ్ ఎస్డికే 200 MB ఉంది కదా. సో
200 MB ఉంది. సో దాన్ని ఎలా యూస్ చేసుకుంటాం? So how do you plan to use that? Like any suggestions? Anyone like
దాని ఇమేజ్ కింద అంటే ఇమేజ్ కింద పుష్ చేసి యూస్ చేసుకుంటాం.
సో
ఎక్స్పోర్ట్ చేస్తాం దాన్ని.
ఎక్స్పోర్ట్ ఒకసారి అంటే క్లియర్ గా చెప్పు, ఐ డిడ్ంట్ యాక్చువల్లీ అండర్స్టాండ్.
సో ఇప్పుడు ఆ 200 MBది అంటే ఆ 200 MBది ఎక్స్పోర్ట్ చేస్తాం పవన్ ఇమేజ్ కింద. సో దాన్ని క్లోన్ చేస్తాం.
ఓకే,
అంటే క్లోన్ చేసి అంటే దాన్ని అప్పుడు 200 అంటే ఇంకా టోటల్ స్పేస్ అవ్వదు కదా, ఇంకా ఆ 200 దాంట్లోనే 200 MBలోనే కన్జ్యూమ్ చేసుకుంటాం అప్లికేషన్ అంతే.
ఓకే, సో యూ వాంట్ టు ఓకే ఒకసారి మళ్ళీ చెప్పు.
అంటే నీ దగ్గర నుంచి ఫైనల్ అవుట్పుట్ 200 MBది వచ్చింది కదా.
200 MB. So just understand, like, so I gave you like an Ubuntu machine. Okay, so I gave you an Ubuntu laptop. So you don't have like any softwares related to ASP.NET, so no Visual Studio, nothing. So I gave you like a GitHub URL of my repo. Okay, so when you download the code, like you'll see only this content. Okay, so these files. So when you download the code from the repo, like you'll see only these files. Okay, so once you download this, yeah.
In that case, generally, multi-stages builds like separate Docker files, right?
Yeah. So
to reduce that, to reduce the size, or else lightweight parent image, as you said that in .NET image.
So you can you can actually use this .NET image like ASP.NET 6.0.
Yes.
But the problem is, so it doesn't have like the build capability. But I gave you the source code, so you need to build the code and then you need to put it on on that image.
Okay.
Okay. So usually like what I'll do is, so basically like I'll create an image out of this SDK 5.0.
Something like a Docker ignore.
No, so Docker is not. Maybe I'll just give my idea. Like, so I don't
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that this is the perfect thing. So since this is not the perfect thing, like these multi-stage builds came, but this is a thought. Like, so how we can actually proceed? Like, okay. So
Yes.
what I'll do is like, so initially like I'll take this build. Okay. So I'll comment out these two items. So what I'll actually try to do is, so I have my Docker file here, right? So I have, what I'll simply do is, so I'll just actually run this particular image. Okay. So I already have this image, Docker images .NET SDK. Okay. So I'll create a Docker file out of this. Okay. So this can be the Docker file, which you can consider it. So this is my Docker file. Okay. So what I'll do is, so I'll actually run this particular Docker file and create an image out of it. So this is my build image. So Docker build minus, I built my image. So in this image, what I'm actually doing, so I'm copying my code, like all the code, CS, this web project, and then all the content that is present in the current directory into this image. Like, so at the time of creating this image. Okay. And what it does, so it actually built this particular image, this particular content. Okay. So now what I can actually do is, so there is something called as Docker. I'll run this particular container. Okay. Docker run /bin/bash. Okay. So you can actually see you have all this code, like compiled code. Okay. So now I have another option, like Control C, Control V. Docker yes. So this is actually running, right? So this is a raw, I mean, blunt way of doing, like, now I'll use Docker cp command. Okay. So Docker cp, what is the command? Like, so Docker cp, I want to copy it from source and then container onto my host image. So Docker cp from container to host, Docker cp, and then my container name is, this is my container cp, and then which folder I want to copy it from, app/build. And then so I want to copy it into something, like which folder I want to copy. So I want to copy it into this folder, something like new folder. Sorry. No. So you can actually see I have all the code. This is the build code, right? So now I have this code. So again, like what I can actually do, so I can use this ASP.NET core application, like, okay. So I can create like another image. Okay. So I can create like another build file, Docker file. Okay. So in this Docker file, what I'll do, So I'll take this ASP.NET Core as the base application, and then so I'll copy the code from this particular folder. Which folder? From this to deploy folder onto this image, like, okay. It'll be something like this. So I need to take this ASP.NET 5.0 as one time, and then so I'll set this. I'll copy the code, like which code like I want to copy. So I want to copy. So this is all not required. So I want to copy to deploy from my folder, like to deploy folder into some folder. Like I'll create a directory, like working directory. Run mkdir. So I'll create like a src directory or something like that on that machine, like image. So I'll copy it onto /src. Okay. So I'll set this working directory src as my working directory. Now I'll just run this container, like, okay. .NET application. So do you think like this will work? So I have like two different Docker files. Let's actually build this. Docker build -t. So I want my container name to be Pavan Arya /2 _ delete runtime. Okay, so C# _ runtime dot. Okay, so this image is built. Now let me run this particular image, like, okay. Yeah, everything is in place. So now I'll run this image. Run -it -p, and then on top. Let's actually get inside this container and then see why we got this error. bin/bash. So you have an option to override this entry point. Entry point. Entry point. So I'm inside this. So previously, like when we saw another point to remember, like so yesterday, like when we are discussing about the CMD and then entry point. So what is happening? Like so, whenever like I have entry point, so even though if I'm trying to override using by providing any command over here, like so when I try to do bin/bash, so it is just appending it to the existing entry point which we provided in the container. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to avoid that, like, so even if you want to override this entry point, so for example, like my entry point in this particular Docker container is .NET web application. Okay. So if I don't provide like any entry point over here, so if I don't provide any entry point here, like what is happening? And then if I do like /bin/bash, okay. So it is, so even though like I gave this command like bin bash, so it is not actually taking that. So I'll show it Docker PS. So
I think it should execute along with the entry point, right?
PS minus my command got PS minus. So you can actually see, so the .NET web application, this is the command like which is getting executed, and then uh, this bin bash is getting appended to this entry point option. Okay. But in case like if you want to override this entry point altogether, so this is the option. Like, so in the Docker run, you need to specify Docker entry point and then bin bash. Hope this is clear.
Yeah.
Now, what did we do? Like, so I tried to copy it into this src directory. So I'm in src directory ls. Okay. So it is in build folder. Okay. So when this command is getting executed, so it is trying to do .NET web application 1.dll, but it is not present in web application 1.dll. Okay. So directly it is not present in src folder. So it is present in build. Okay. So that is the problem with my image. So let me correct that. So I need to also make this build as an entry point. Okay. So now I'll recreate this image. Okay. Now Docker run -p minus. Okay. So now it is actually running, and let me see which container it is actually using. I mean, which port. See, you can see this again, like another issue. So it is not exposing any port. So can someone answer why this is actually not exposing any random port? So though I gave like -p option.
In the script,
The Docker file we did not expose.
So in Docker file, like I didn't actually expose 5,000. Now I'm doing that. Again, this needs to be killed. Now let me check Docker PS. So now it is getting exposed on 49168. Now it is actually working, right? So what did we actually do? So using one Docker file, what I did, so I created like using one Docker file, like I created an image out of this SDK. Okay. So using this SDK 5.0, so what I did, so I actually created an image from this. Okay. And after creating an image from SDK 5.0, so I created another Docker file. I created another Docker file, and then I copied the code from there, like the final build code, and into this container. Okay. So now if I want to deploy this application, so what I can actually do, simply I can delete this build image, right? So you agree with me? Like, so I can simply publish this runtime and runtime image. Like I can push it to my Docker Hub or AKS, like Amazon registry, Docker registry, and there, like in my production servers, I can simply use this particular thing. Like, okay. you don't have like Docker, any .NET related software installed on your Ubuntu machine, but still like you're able to build the code and then you are able to create a runtime image out of it. See, that is the beauty of Docker. Like, so is this clear? Like what I'm actually doing over here?
Yeah, but
Or any?
that
Yeah,
that
any.
doesn't solve
Yeah.
our problem with the space, right? Like it's still up by a lot of space.
Obviously, like the end goal should be like our image size should be very less. Okay, it shouldn't have like all these unnecessary softwares. It should be plain and crispy. So for example, let's say like you are actually deploying your Angular code. Yeah, so let's take a solid example of Angular. Okay, so when you actually build this code, like Angular code, so do you need like a node and then all these Angular SDKs installed on that particular machine? So when you are actually building the Angular code for production?
No, so
No,
no. We will do it in the local and then we can push that code to.
no, so that is not, that is what you don't do, right? So do you actually build the code on your local and then do you commit that, do you create a final build version? So is that the
No,
case?
no. So if you want to do build in production, we need Node.
So you need Node application and then you need Angular SDK in order
Yeah.
to build this Angular code, right? So
Mhm.
once this final Angular code is built, so you'll be getting a package, right? All those JS files. So when you are actually deploying these JS files onto the production server, there do you need this Node software and then Angular software?
No, like once build is done, we don't need them.
You don't need Angular and then these softwares, right?
Mm.
So that is the same thing. Like, so this build environment, so we need only this build thing only in the I mean only in this environment. Okay. So in the only in the build for building this code, source code, you need this SDK 6.0 or 5.0. Whereas for runtime, like it is just it needs another piece of like ASP.NET software. That's it. Like very minimal ASP.NET software. Okay, so ideally, like in Jenkins server, what you do, so you'll create this build and then you'll copy the code onto a specific folder and then you'll create an image like a runtime image. And finally, you publish this runtime image to AWS. And in AWS, like you'll pull this particular runtime image and you'll create multiple containers. So that is a regular flow, right?
Yeah.
Anyone like, so Prithvi is clear, like anyone, do you have any questions on this?
One last question. Like, so after once we are done with the build, but still we'll have that image, right? So we'll delete that image after we are done with the build.
Yeah, so this is on your deployment. So my end goal is to create this image, like runtime image. Okay. So just remember this, like usually what we do is like, so there will be something called as like a build server, like Jenkins server or anything like that. So you actually push your images, like, so either to the Docker Hub or Amazon registry, or it is like Google Docker registry. So you'll push your image to that particular location. Like you'll not be sharing your Docker file and then you'll create these images there. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. So your end goal is to create an image, runtime image, which is actually, which will be used by any of these softwares like Kubernetes or anything like that. Okay.
Okay, now I got it. Right. So that's
So
what.
these steps, so they'll be processed in your build server. Like it can be like in your Jenkins server or something like that. Okay. So you'll create this build and then you'll create a runtime image out of this. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Others, like any question? So now, do you appreciate the beauty of .NET? Like, so it is not actually required to install like any of the softwares like Visual Studio or anything like, so any .NET framework on your host machine. So you can simply use this Docker image and then you can copy the code onto that image and you can build this image, build your code, and then take this final output, put it on a folder and send this folder to another image like runtime image and create an image out of it, like, okay, and use that image in your production environment. So you have only this Docker image with simply with Docker, like you're able to do this. So in the same way, like if I want to compile and build like Angular code or Ruby code or Python code or Java code, whatever it is, So I can use these respective images. So does it make sense? No? Or any questions? Okay, so you're able to build this image and then you're able to create this runtime image. So I have to create like multiple Docker files and then I need to create like multiple images and then this is the intermediary image and finally like I got this runtime image, right? So it is a painful process. So in order to solve this, we have something called as like multi-stage builds. Okay. So what these multi-stage builds actually do, I'll show it to you. Okay, so initially I have this .NET SDK 5.0 as a build. Okay, so this is my build server. And now after this, like what I'll try to do is, so I can actually specify something like this, like, okay, again, like from, I'll just provide ASP.NET 5.0 as runtime. Okay, so I'll just have this as a runtime. Okay, so there is something called as like a copy command. Let's just copy. I'll just take it. I'm very bad at like remembering syntax. Okay, don't expect me to remember the syntax. Okay. So I'll take this. I'm just taking as runtime. Okay. After that, like I'm just setting like / app as my folder. Okay, I'll create like a folder or something like that. What could be okay. Run mkdir. So what are the steps like I'm using here? So in my runtime, like I created this src folder. So I'll create again like this is again like I'm taking another image. Okay. So this image like I'm taking as I'm creating like src image mkdir src and then I'm setting this working directory so you can actually see. So I'm copying the code. Similarly, like I can copy the code. So from which so here like I'm copying from to deploy. So this is the folder on my host machine, right? Now I want to take this artifacts like so I want to take this content like which was actually built and use that content. Okay. So so which folder I want to take? Like I want to take it from this publish. Okay, app build. So previously like sorry, like from like I want to take it from which image? Like I want to take it from this build image. Okay. So from which folder I want to take? I want to take it from this app build. And I want to copy it into this working directory. So I want to set this as my working directory src. I'm setting my working directory. So I created it after building this code, like I took another image ASP.NET 5.0 as runtime. And then I created like an image like out of this. I created a folder inside this src folder. And then so I'm copying the code, like I made this particular working src as this working directory. So now I'm copying the code like from this image, build image, and then from which folder. So I want to copy it from /app/build. into the current directory, which is the src directory. Okay. So once that is done, like again, I need to set this working directory. Okay. So in the src directory, like I'll copy this app and build it. Finally expose 5000 and then run. We'll delete all these existing images so that you'll get clarity. Okay. So I want to delete this image also. Build image like 7 here. There is a container running. Docker run. Okay, so there are like multiple images with these nulls, right? So we can actually remove them using this command like docker image prune. What is this other command? Minus a. Yes. Still there are few images, but let's ignore them. Okay, now let me, so you can actually see I don't have this build image or something like that. Okay. So what I can actually do, so I'm inside this folder, right? Docker build -t multi-stage dot. Okay, so it got completed, and now let's see Docker images. So this is my multi-stage image, right? Let me run this particular one multi-stage image. Docker one. I'll just show you like what is the code, I mean, what is actually happening. Like, so did we actually copy the code or not? -it -p, and then entry point I want to overwrite just to show you the code. Point /bin /bash. Then this is the one. Okay, so I'm in src build directory. Like, since this is my last working lab, you can see like ls. What happened? Okay, somehow this copy commands are actually wrong, I believe. So just copied all the content into the current directory. So okay, so I copied the content from app build directory into this current directory, src directory. Okay, so there is no need to set this build again. Like, so since my code is directly copied into this src. I'll again like rebuild this image. So this time, like I do this. You can see I have all the code. only the compiled code. Okay. So previously I used to copy the code into this src directory, and then all the code, like all those controllers and all this heavy stuff. Let me exit out of this. So rerun this container without entry point override. Okay, so it got started. Let me check what port it is exposed. It is exposed on 49171. Okay, so you can see I'm able to run this. And if you see images, Docker images, okay, so you'll see only one image, Docker multi-stage image. So there is nothing like an intermediate, this intermediary image, like you'll not see that. Okay. So is this clear?
So I mean, how does it work? I mean, why did it take just one image and not the two images?
Yeah, so initially, like when it is actually building the code, so let me inspect this history. Okay. Actually see, so if I try to rebuild, so everything is actually cached, so you can actually see. So initially it is taking .NET SDK, okay, and then so after taking the .NET SDK, so it is actually running this, executing all these commands, like okay, and finally it is actually copying the code, like so you can actually see, so it is actually copying the code over there. So now let's see the history of this particular image, like what is happening. And also history, like I'm not able to get the complete overview. So ideally what is happening behind the scenes is this is just like a temporary directory, like temporary image. So once this image is actually built, so it will remove this particular image, like so it doesn't actually consider this image, like okay. So and then so after building this image, like the artifacts, like it will actually, we are actually copying the artifacts, right? So once we copy these artifacts, so this will be the final image that is actually left. So this will be removed in the background or something like that.
I mean, does it only depend on the order of commands which we are passing in the Docker file?
Exactly. Like, so this is like the starting image, and then this is like the final image, like, okay. So you should actually follow the order. So for example, if I just do reverse it, okay. Execute this. Particular. So what is not here? Oh, sorry. Like I did something weird. Delete multi-space. So you can actually see how many steps are there. Like, it is executing only these 7 steps. Just observe this and then we'll revert it back. So if you see the difference, like, so here it is actually executing these commands, like, okay, only the first 7 commands, like, so, but it is not actually copying it, like, but here, like, it is actually copying.
Yeah.
Okay, so here it is not actually copying my artifacts. So I'll just try to dig deeper, like, so why this is actually happening in this way. And so, but ideally, like, this is the approach, like, so you can actually build the base image, and then once you build the base image, so you can take that as an intermediary image and then create and copy the content, like, from that particular image, and finally create your last image. So the last one, which is actually present at the end, so that will be the final one. So here, if you see, so it is actually ignoring these first commands, like, okay, previously, like, we copied this above, right? SRC copy from and all this stuff, entry point, and it directly jumped onto this thing, like building the second image, like SDK image itself. Okay.
I think from build it is not there. That's why it is happening like that.
Yeah. So, but ideally, like, you're not seeing those commands, right?
Yeah, now can we compare that both image sizes?
Both I
Earlier,
or yeah. So earlier, like, it was 600 MB, right?
600, yes, 630, that is. Yes.
So Docker images. So this is 209 MB, if you see.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
So with 209 MB, so I'm able to build my code and then I'm able to run it.
exactly.
Okay. So that is the
Reduce
main yeah.
drastically.
Yeah. So that is the main advantage of, like, this thing, like, so multi-stage builds. So without having, like, any .NET software installed on your machine, with simply by having this Docker code, Docker engine installed on your machine, so you're able to build this .NET code and run it, right? So if you're working on PHP or any of these software, so it is not mandatory to have all these softwares installed on. So for example, like the PHP installation on Ubuntu and the PHP installation in Windows, so it varies a lot. So there are, like, lot differences. So I think people working in Lockbox, they can answer this. So there are, like, multiple versions, and then even the downloads are different for both Ubuntu as well as, like, Windows. Okay. So, and the client, they work on Ubuntu machines, and we are working on Windows machines. So that is actually creating more problems. So in that case, like, if we can use Docker, so simply, like, everyone is actually on Docker, and then everyone can make use of this Ubuntu in the containers. Okay, so there are options, like, so for example, like, if I want to build this image, so I want to see, I want to build only this particular image, and I don't want to execute this image. Okay, so in that case, there is something called as a target. Okay, so if I build this particular image using the target, so you can see that, so it is actually executing only these images, these only this particular stuff, right? So it is not executing this runtime. So if you want to see the difference, so this is with target and this is without target. See, here it is running these extra steps, like, okay. So here it is not running those steps. So that is the main, so you can use this target flag. So for example, like, if there are, like, multiple intermediary images, so let's say, like, you want to build that particular image and then you want to test it, you want to run some test cases on it, or you want to do something, and then you have, like, multi-stages builds with many options. Okay. But there is some issue with this particular option. Okay, so if there is an issue with this particular stage itself, like, it is not actually required to run this, right? So you can simply execute this by putting the target as build, and then you can actually debug this image. So you can go into this particular image and then see, okay, so whether all this stuff is actually, so whether we have this code in the appropriate directories or not, or something like that. Okay. So that is the advantage of a target. Like, so if you want to build a specific, only a specific like intermediary image, like, okay. So any questions for now? So I hope like today's session, like I didn't actually bore you.
Need practice.
It's really good.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, so this is with the multi-stage build. So this is really, really useful. So when we are actually building enterprise level applications, so obviously like your host machine, like you don't want to install all these softwares, right? So you can simply go ahead with this multi-stage builds. One stage for building the code and then the other stage for actually creating a runtime image. Okay. Okay, so any questions?